Okay, in today's episode, we are going to discuss the Chariot. And this is such an interesting and profoundly difficult card to interpret when you don't know anything about the esoteric imagery on it. At least I always found that. Did you?
It's more limited if you don't have that foundation.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, 20 years ago just staring at it and going, huh, what? But anyway, some of the older names of the Chariot are the triumphal car, the cubic chariot. I have no idea where I got that one, but yes, you can see he's in a cube. The reward of victory, and then the hermetic ones are
the child of the powers of the waters and the lord of the triumph of light.
Right. The powers of the waters immediately leads us right into some material right there. Why waters?
Right. The whole path, this is the path coming down from Binah to Gabora. So it's that the great sea of Binah coming down, across the abyss down the left-hand pillar.
And the idea that it is Cancer, water sign.
Right. It's cardinal water, so it's the first inrush of the water element.
So the astrological association for the Chariot is Cancer, right? And what's Cancer mean?
The crab.
Yeah. So in what way is the Chariot like a crab?
Well, that sounds like a joke. Well, if you're looking for symbolism, we can certainly find it in both versions of the card. And I always think of the Chariot. The Chariot is never going straight ahead. It's always moving to one side or the other, much the way a crab moves. It's indirect.
Both of these chariots, it's always seemed to me that you'd have a hard time moving terribly fast in a forward direction in either of these constructions. To me, the thing that makes the Chariot most crab-like is the armor. In both cases, they're absolutely enclosed in a carapace, protecting their soft, squishy interiors.
Right, and I've heard it said that the Cancer people themselves are like that, hard on the outside and soft on the inside.
That's what they say.
So they protect themselves with their shell because they're very soft inside.
Yeah, it sounds like
sensitive.
That's right. Soft, chewy caramel center, crispy chocolate coating. Also, that's sort of in line with the Hebrew letter association, right?
Right.
Which means enclosure or fence.
Right, fence or enclosure.
Right. Let's see. Going quickly through the rulerships, we have, of course, the moon rules Cancer, and there are lunar references. Probably the one that people go to first is those moon-like crescent shapes on the Rider-Waite-Smith charioteer's shoulders.
With faces.
With faces, right. They do look like moons, but actually they are referred to by Waite as Urim and Thummim, which are divinatory objects. Nobody knows exactly what they were or how they were used, but I've been learning that they may have been on the high priest's breastplate, something
Thus
like
have
that.
I heard as well.
Yeah. So,
I've heard that they may be either words inscribed on it or stones embedded in it, objects or stones embedded in it.
Rachel Pollack says that the stones would move up and down in response to the question in divination, which seems so sci-fi to me.
Right. Yeah, I know nothing about that.
Yeah.
Also heard them referred to as being a white stone and a black stone, which calls to mind, light and darkness, the phases of the moon, the full and the new, perhaps. Yes and no. Often in divination, like the white or the black will be the yes or the no. That whole polarity could also be a reference to the supernals from the path of Keter to Binah, from white to black.
Right. And there's also a sort of a river. He's kind of beached, actually, in the Rider-Waite-Smith card. He's on a shore next to a river. There's a river running behind him, and that could have to do with the moon and Cancer, or perhaps they're the same rivers coming down from the, the high priestess.
Or it could be a moat, a water enclosure.
Yeah, it could be.
We just see the river behind him, but it could be a fence of water.
That's right. A fence of water behind a wall of stone, because there's also that in the background. Let's see. So the rulership of the moon, Saturn in detriment in Cancer. I just jotted this down real quick before I came. Jupiter exalted in Cancer, and Mars in fall.
Jupiter. Yeah, Jupiter. I guess you could say the square on the breastplate
could be a
Jupiter reference, the fourth Sephira. Although I also wonder if it's just being a square, if it's a reference to an enclosure.
It could be, or a jewel on a breastplate or something like that. I was looking at, there's a very similar square on the crown of the Waitsmith Justice as well, which is kind of interesting, though perhaps not related. Let's see. And that breastplate actually is really reminiscent of what it's like when you take apart a crab. I'm sorry to say I know quite well, but they do have that sort of bib-like structure.
In the Crowley card, the grail that he's holding which is a color of Jupiter.
That's true.
And even if you look at, I don't know, the sides of the grail. So the perspective is that you're looking down into it. It's
right.
Turned on its side, and those little handles on the side almost look like glyphs of Cancer.
I thought so. I thought they do. This is in the Thoth card on the sides of the receptacle that he's holding. They do look a little bit like very stylized Cancer glyphs. And of course, he has a crab right on his head. I kind of forgot about that. So as far as the decans of Cancer go, they're associated with the 2 of Cups, the 3 of Cups, and the 4 of Cups. So, which is interesting because if you look at just the imagery of the Chariot versus the imagery of the 2, 3, and 4 of Cups, particularly in the weight, it's kind of hard to see any connections. But if we go through them bit by bit, we do see some themes that we talk about, some of the themes we talk about when we think about the Chariot reflected within the cards. So the 2 of Cups, of course, the Lord of Love. Everyone loves to see this card. And I guess that what's going on there is we have Venus in Cancer, the lesser benefic, and you can see her powers of connection and harmony and love and affection being expressed in here.
Yeah, and if you think about the season of Cancer, I've been noticing the baby birds I'm seeing nests full of baby birds and the mummy coming to feed them and stuff. And, Cancer season is the sign of maternal, love. And then so Venus, the mother, the Empress, the mother, we see Venus and Cancer obviously having a very maternal love heart quality. I've seen the card predict pregnancy or pre-pregnancy, like that the time is right to be fertile or whatever.
Yeah. And there is that notion which kind of goes with the Chariot of enclosure, of safeness.
The waters of the womb, if you will.
Yeah. The idea that you have a protection for this thing that's growing.
The precious object, the
grail, object, like the grail
carried.
in the Chariot. And, carrying the waters of Binah. There's that. And it's funny, though, when I get this card, I'm always finding myself telling people who get a bit overexcited when they see it in a love reading that, it's a good start. That's
why I said
it's the prerequisite.
Pre-pregnancy. I see it as being the time is right for that to happen, not necessarily that it has happened or will happen, but that the time is right for it to happen.
Yeah.
The conditions are there.
Yeah, I think it's a very good way to set the scene.
Yeah.
And I've tried to sort of think about since I've seen so many sad love stories and readings for people, I try to imagine what a good love story would look like. And it would probably go like 2 of Cups, 4 of Wands, 6 of something, and then 10
of discs.
10 of discs. Right. Yeah.
There till the end through old age and all that.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but this is always a good start. And in fact, when Randy and I got married in 1998, I had the Marseille 2 of Cups on the wedding invitation.
Nice.
Yeah. I figured why not? Although who knows if anybody made any sense of it at the time. So that's the Venus in Cancer, and then we go on to Mercury in Cancer for the 3 of Cups. So, which is the Lord of Abundance, which you can totally see in both cards, really, both the weight and.
Right. They both have fruits in evidence.
Yeah. And I think, Mercury, though it's really a neutral presence, not a benefic or a malefic. It does tend to quicken things and ease things. And in the images of the decans, if you kind of go back to the Yavana Jataka and the Picatrix, there's always someone who's described as a person with a sweet voice, which is mercurial, right? So you think of like, if you look at the Three of Cups and Weight and you see these sort of happy people having a little celebration together.
The muses or something.
Yeah, there's this
three graces.
I don't know. There's something about it that's like a good manners card to me. Just trying to bring harmony and happiness through the power of your
to our host.
A toast. Good. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then we've got the pomegranate reference in the Thoth card, which Mercury in Cancer. So Mercury as the psychopomp, the Demeter and Persephone going below and eating of the pomegranate seed.
Right. Which itself is a sort of reference to the cycle of agrarian fertility. Yeah.
And just another one of those little slight, not so much warnings, but just to be aware that sense pleasures are not lasting, to enjoy them in the moment.
Yeah, I think we find that a lot with these Mercury cards, that they're kind of, there's an emphasis on what's come before and what's coming next, and not just staying in the moment. Yeah. Well, the Chariot, you can think of it as, this is a Copic reference again, calls this decan the walled garden of Cancer, the second decan. And that speaks a little bit again to that sense of protection and enclosure.
Right. The fence of Cheth in the Chariot cards letter.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much that feeling of being in a protected conveyance that allows you to, I don't know, there's something about the Chariot's motion in here that I'm trying to capture. The idea that, that somehow goes with Mercury, this idea that there's, that in order to speed, you've got to be safe.
Yeah.
The idea that communication only takes place in a safe space, something like that. Anyway, and then on to the Four of Cups, the Moon in Cancer. Such an interesting image and so different, really, between the two decks, it's called the Lord of Luxury, or Crowley calls it luxury, but the Golden Dawn calls it blended pleasure, which kind of makes me think of, the moon's role as sort of a changing, ratios.
Fluctuating force.
Yeah. And this idea of luxury, I think when I look at the Weight card, I always think of the story of the Buddha, and the spoiled princeling coming to the realization that there are not enough resources for everyone. So many people read that expression in the Four of Cups differently. Some see that the person is dissatisfied. Some people say he can't see it. Some people say he doesn't like what he sees.
Yeah, that's one of the things I dislike about the minors in the Weight deck, is that sometimes there's so much leeway of interpretation and people just make up whatever they think they see kind of thing. And and then they extrapolate that onto other decks, and I'm just like,
well,
I've seen people say this is the Four of Cups is a card of nausea, and I'm because he looks nauseated, and I'm just like
dyspepsia.
Okay, maybe, but
well, I think there's something to be said for allowing a broad spectrum of interpretation into every card, so that you can find everything in life in the deck.
Right.
But
I guess
but
Cancers
it's very
do have
subjective.
sensitive stomachs,
They
so
do.
I guess I'll buy that. Moon in Cancer could be a fluctuating stomach,
and
a little
mal
bit
de
of-
mer, a
yeah.
little seasickness,
perhaps.
But I mean, I think it's certainly a much more ambiguous image.
I think
than
of
one
the
we see.
card too as being, the sense of. So we were talking about Cancer as the sign of the womb and the enclosure and the waters of the womb. Is the Four is that point at which your world becomes a little too small. It's very pleasant in there, and you kind of want to stay.
That's good.
It's luxurious, but you can't stay there. It's going to get too small. Your world needs to expand a little bit, even if it's painful.
Right. So this is the third trimester card you're saying.
Exactly.
I'm feeling like, God,
Nice
I can't
in
take this
here.
much
You
more.
have to leave. Yes, you do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And then, being born into Leo.
I think Crowley says, or somebody says about the card that it's the bath water that eventually grows lukewarm and then cold.
Right. Yeah, I think there's that idea, that craving for security in here but then which turns into a hunger for something else. Yeah, that's something I see.
You can't stay in your shell forever. To go back to the Cancer, the crab.
Even the crab has to shed its shell and get a new one or grow a new one.
The hermit crabs do.
The hermit crabs do. Yeah, lobsters molt too. Okay, so the crab reference also reminds me of the Merkabah in Jewish mysticism, which is part of the vision of Ezekiel, where he sees this fiery chariot with the living beasts, which we'll be talking about a lot more, but also the idea that you need to be protected to be in the presence of the divine. I used to think that it meant the Merkabah was the chariot you travel in, but it's not actually. The Merkabah is the chariot that you go to see, the throne of God, the presence of the divine that you're trying to access in Merkabah mysticism. But there is this tale of, the 4 rabbis who go into the presence of the divine, and one of them bursts into flame, and one of them goes mad, and one of them has a crisis of faith because he sees that there's like a vision of Metatron and he's seeing double. So there's like a fiery, a watery, and an airy rabbi. And then there's Rabbi Akiva, who's the earthy rabbi, who's protected by
I'll go into a bar, please. No?
Okay. So, and then there's the earthy rabbi who is protected by his earthiness and comes out sane. Okay. You want a rabbi joke? Okay.
Sure.
All right. So,
love a good rabbi joke.
Let's see. An astrologer, a rabbi, and a ceremonial magician walk into a bar. They get completely wasted and they throw books at each other until 4 a.m. And there is no punchline, but that's what my office looks like right now. Okay, sorry. It wasn't really a joke. Anyway, Merkabah, we'll be talking about that more later.
You mentioned while you were speaking the word throne. Mm-hmm. Did you call it the throne of God?
The throne of the presence.
The throne of the presence.
Something like that.
Well, that word triggered some associations because the chariot is sometimes referred to as a movable throne associated with the power to go. So you see, when we talk about the 4 creatures, and we're going to again mention the 4 powers of the Sphinx, and then there's that 5th power to go on this movable throne. And also the word throne is interesting because the angels of Binah were said to be called thrones, where the angels of Hakma were said to be called wheels.
Wheels, right.
So here we have a wheeled throne, perhaps referencing the supernal influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why not? Oh, yeah. And and it's interesting that no matter what kind of progress it is, there is always progress. There is always motion with the chariot, whether it's side to side like a crab or whether it's forward and back like a car. And we often actually just read the chariot as a car in divination, or whether it's going within, in this sort of journey to the divine. It's always on the move. And I think there's also associated with that is this idea that you need something to cross the abyss, because we're going from Binah, from the supernals, to Gevurah. You need some kind of conveyance to get you there. So since we're on Kabbalah, we also have we have Binah references in both.
Right. Well, both have the blue canopy.
Mm-hmm.
One's a starry curtain and the other one is more of almost looks watery curtain. Mm-hmm. On Crowley's card, it has embroidered in the canopy the word abrahadabra.
Has it really?
It
does. I
didn't
know that.
Look closely.
Oh my God. It is. It's
so rather than abracadabra, Crowley spells the word abra.
Actually, it says kadabra here.
Right, but he reinterprets it in his writing. For whatever reason, Lady Harris wrote it the traditional old spelling, but it really should have been written abrahadabra,
well,
which is
a whole hell of a lot easier to write in cursive than H's.
Right, that could be that, which he calls the word of the aeon.
I thought that was kafefe.
He states in his... Oh, God. Everyone with higher knowledge knows what that means. Sorry.
Okay.
God, that killed
Sorry.
me.
I don't usually manage to get you off track, but I did.
That was a good one.
So,
right. So
word of
the word of the Aeon, abrahadabra. He respells it for gematria reasons and other reasons. There's a footnote in the Book of Thoth that says that an entire book could be written on this one word alone. So there's really a lot to process there. But if you break down the word, so it then corresponds to the number 418. If you replace that C with the H, which if you spell out the word, the Hebrew letter Chet, that is also 418 when spelled in full.
When spelled in full.
So there's a relationship there between this card and that word and the great work itself.
So be sure that you look at the top of the Thoth card real close, because you can live with it for 20 years and not see it, apparently.
So,
abracadabra, there it is.
Talking again about that word a little bit, There's a lot that can be said about the great work itself, but it's basically a indication of that process. And if you look at the word itself, you'll see at the center of the word the had, H-A-D, referring to Hadit. And then on either side of that word, you have Abra. Ab is a Hebrew word for father, and Ra we know as the sun god. There's a lot of other things you could say about this word, that it has 11 letters, and there's so many things you could say about this card, but I think that's a little
about
bit
the word.
There's a lot to go into, but there's a 5 and a 6 reference in there because it has 5 A's or 5 alephs surrounded by 6 other letters. So that's whenever you see a 5 and a 6 combination, that's usually a reference to the microcosm and the macrocosm. That's part of the formula of the great work. The rose and the cross, the micro and the macro, or the pillar in the yoni.
Right. And we also so that's the references to Bina in the canopy. And then we also have a reference to Gevura in the scarlet wheels of the Thoth card, right? The red of Gevura.
Because red is the color of Mars.
And 10 stars on the armor of the charioteer.
Yep.
So that's
the Tree of Life reference.
Tree of Life, or possibly also to Malkut itself,
Malkut and Bina.
as the daughter of Bina.
Yep.
Right.
And that's part of the whole great work process as well.
So let's talk about the great work a little bit. When we say that, what are we referring to?
Boy, you had to ask that.
Yeah, I know. Do it in 2 sentences or less. Is it fair to say, can we sum it up as like the knowledge and conversation of your holy guardian angel?
Yes, let's start there. There's another step beyond that, but that's the first step.
So how to put this? So when we talk about the Tree of Life in the context of the Golden Dawn, there's this assumption that the magician is trying to ascend the tree. And in the process of ascending the tree, he or she becomes more self-aware, for one, gets to know and familiarize himself or herself with different parts of the self, and eventually makes it to the point where they make contact with what's called the holy guardian angel, right? Right. And that's part of what we're referring to when we say the great work.
First contact is the first step. Then there's the first contact, and then there's the actual knowledge and conversation, which is beyond the first contact. And then there's more to come as you ascend higher. That's basically in the Sephra of Tiferet, where that experience occurs. And then eventually, if you should get so far and endure all the trials, you can get all the way up to the supernal realm.
Endure the destruction of the ego while crossing the abyss. And
right.
Now, is that the Abramelin operation going all the way up to the top, or is the
I thought that was
operation
more about the knowledge and conversation.
So getting you to Tiferet.
Yeah.
Okay, got you. And hardly anybody does it. But that's the whole point.
I think in the Wake world, Crowley, as he takes the story. Are you familiar with the Wake world?
No.
It's kind of like a fairy.
No.
It's the Tree of Life and this process of the great work and these ascending the paths as a fairy tale kind of as told from the point of view of a
fairy tale version of Promethea.
It's really cool. But anyway, Crowley says in the Wake world, as part of that story, the prince, who's the holy guardian angel, is speaking, and he keeps saying along different stages of the tree, most people spend their whole lives here. That whole thing reminds me. So there's another in the Book of Thoth associated with this card where it talks about the Oracle of the Bottle. So there's a story about someone that I think 3 friends go to, see this Oracle of the Bottle. And I think it might also be called Oracle of the Vulture or something like that. But, and the question he brings is, should I marry? And that's said to be, this is kind of a veiled reference to the holy guardian angel, because the process of knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel. So in that fairy tale, we in Malkut are the princess, and we're seeking the prince in Tiferet to complete us and have that marriage with. So anyway, his question for the oracle is, should I marry? And the oracle of the bottle spins or whatever it does, and it makes the answer he gets is a sound like, and it's spelled as trink, and the answer is trink. The bottle makes like a clacking noise. He interprets that answer, trink, as being drink. And so he takes that as an affirmative answer that yes, he should marry because he hears it as drink deep. When I hear that story, I also think of the wake world, which is what made me think of that, because all throughout that fairy tale, the princess says to the prince, kiss me. That's in relationship. Speaking that kiss is the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel in allegories. It's a great story. Yes. If you think you can get it in written form, but if you go to the Speech in the Silence podcast, there's actually a really great reading of it. So you can go listen to that, and it's fun.
All right. Well, can you unpack a little bit the Grail imagery here? Because isn't that, does that have to do with that as well?
So the last card, the lovers, we had the male and the female figure. And then in this card, we see the Grail imagery, and in the center of the Grail is supposedly the union, the white, the red, the red and the white, the blood and the gluten, combined in this vessel, this chalice, this holy grail that then he is conveying and protecting.
Okay. Can we just say object. Blood and gluten? Are we talking sexual fluids?
On one level, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
On one level.
Good.
It's not what you would think, because the red is actually the masculine and the white is the feminine.
Okay. So what we're really talking about here is, again, a reference to the union of male and female. Well, the Grail itself is
a quest.
But it has to do with his relationship with Binah, doesn't it? Isn't he supposed to bear the chalice to Binah or from Binah?
Right. He's conveying. He's the 2-in-1 conveyed. I think Crowley refers to it as the 2-in-1 conveyed. So the male and the female forces then enclosed in this grail are then conveyed. So you could look at that as what occurs in the great work with the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. You have the 2-in-1, the male and the female, then thus united. And it's a spiritual level rather than strictly the
both. But
right. There's definitely both things being referred to there. That then, ultimately bringing it back to Binah.
Right. And that's really interesting to me in terms of sort of more mundane interpretations of the Chariot. Even in the Marseille, he was considered, a hero of the city or a warrior, but not the actual ruler, the one who conveys or partakes in the mission or, takes the order and fulfills it in, making him kind of an archetypal hero figure.
Yeah, it's a very martial. Maybe that's the Gevora reference.
But also the idea that, he has no personality outside his armor. This is the job.
Right, the
he
faceless.
Is the job.
In the Crowley card, he's purposely made a face that you cannot see.
He's all about his job, which, as the Grail Knight, or Parsifal, or whatever Arthurian analogy you want to make, his job is simply to protect it with his virtue and his purity, I guess.
Right. Purity, again, when I hear that word in relation to this card, it makes me think of the Grail quest and how the pure heart to pursue the Grail.
Oh, and the surrender and destruction of the ego crossing the abyss, because you can't have that if you're going to the supernals.
Right. You must give all, which we'll find out in the next card.
Exactly. Okay, let's go back to Ezekiel, because we should probably
reread the
vision of Ezekiel. So we already talked about Ezekiel when we did the Hierophant, I think, and we read this passage, but let's read it again because it's a good one. All right, so Ezekiel has this vision, and he sees this whirlwind. Ooh, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, which is interesting because that's one of the colors
of the scale.
Out of the midst of the fire. Also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man, and everyone had 4 faces, and everyone had 4 wings. And their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot. They sparkled like the color of burnished brass. And they had the hands of a man under the wings on their 4 sides, and they 4 had their faces and their wings. Their wings were joined one to another. They turned not when they went every one straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, they 4 had the face of a man and the face of a lion on the right side. And they 4 had the face of an ox on the left side. They 4 also had the face of an eagle. Yeah, and it does go on quite a bit. It goes on to describe the chariot they're, associated with, if not actually attached to. Okay, so where are our beasts? Here they are on the Thoth card pretty clearly.
Yeah, he definitely portrays that vision a little more accurately in the sense that there are 4 beasts rather than 2 beasts, each of which is then also a 4-fold beast. So if you look at these beasts, they're not just a lion, a man, an eagle, and a bull, that each of them combines parts of the other. And this is said to be making them 16, a reference to the 16 court cards or the sub-elements, each element being divided into sub-elements. So fire of fire, fire of water, fire of earth, fire of air, like you see in the courts. So each one of these creatures is a 4-fold creature, and there's 4 of them.
They're called the 4 creatures of Ezekiel, or the 4 living creatures. Also, they correspond, the cherubic beasts, they correspond with the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac as well. Ox, lion, eagle, Scorpio, and Aquarius, man. So that was cherubic beasts on the Thoth card. Now what do we have on the Waite Smith card?
Well, it looks like we have 2 as opposed to 4, and they're sort of mirror images of each other, positive and negative, kind of like one's like a negative of a photograph of the other one.
Yeah, and the Sphinx itself is a hybrid beast.
Yes. Right.
Although not necessarily specifically the same hybrids that we've been talking about with the cherubic, the 4 living creatures. I think she's supposed to be hindquarters of a lion, lioness, and then, a woman in front.
Right.
Which is why she can ask riddles. We probably, since we have the Sphinx right here, we should probably do the Sphinx's riddle and the 4 powers of the Sphinx. So the Sphinx's riddle, what is it? It goes, what goes on 4 legs in the morning,
2 legs
at noon, and 3 at night. And the answer is, of course, man.
So youth. Adulthood and old age with the stick.
With the stick, exactly. And, I've heard that referenced as, to be able to answer that question correctly, you have to have a self-knowledge. You have to recognize your mortality and your changeability as a human, and the fact that you're going to die. And again, that surrender of the ego and crossing the abyss, I think that's related to that. And then the 4 powers of the Sphinx. I mean, where does that come from anyway?
I believe it's Levi.
Is it?
Yeah. It's probably, if you've been listening along on the podcast, this won't be the first time that you've heard this, but the 4 powers are associated with the 4 signs, the 4 elements, or the 4 worlds. And basically, if you put them in order of fire, water, air, earth, the order would be to will for the power of fire, to dare for the power of water, to know for the power of air, and to keep silent for the power of earth.
Right. and then with the combination of the 4 to go.
Right. So the adept masters these 4 virtues or these 4 powers in order to proceed in the great work, which is why they're on this card. Because in order to go and accomplish this work, one has to have already mastered these other 4.
Now, another reference that these 2 particular sphinxes allude to is the Platonic dialogue of Phaedrus, in which he basically creates this metaphor of reason, the charioteer, trying to control 2 opposite horses, one black and one white. And the black one is supposed to be the irrational side of man, the appetites, the hungers, and the white one, the so-called good horse, is the rational will, the power to decide and impose your will. But it's only reason that can moderate between the 2. And since they're pulling in opposite directions, it's reason's job to get them going in the same direction, get them to cooperate and achieve whatever it is that you need to do.
And it's all about balance. This card is a lot about the need for balance.
It's much more binary, I think, than the Thoth card is. It feels much more like a mix of those dualities, black and white. Above the sphinxes, or between them on the Waite-Smith chariot, we see that winged solar disk, which we have seen before. Where was it that we saw it before?
We saw it in the Magus.
In the Magus, that's right. That's right. And also below that, a shield sort of a thing with a red, not a dreidel, not a top, but a lingam and yoni. So that refers back to that whole conversation we had earlier in this episode about male and female.
Also about the micro and the macro, or as macro. Crowley, when we were talking about, the abrahadabra, the pillar in the void, which is another yoni phallus conjunction.
Right. The 0 and the 1.
Yes.
Also, which of course also has something to do with the wheel, the 0 and the 1.
The 4 pillars in each card.
Yeah, let's talk about the 4 pillars.
Well, I have heard that they are a visual representation of the tree of life in 3 dimensions.
Whoa.
So have you ever seen the actual, it's like a model of the tree of life, but it's in 3D.
Sort of looks like a molecule kind of a thing.
Yeah, it does. Looks like it's made together with Tinker Toys or something. And it's, so it has 4 pillars. And
ain't it on the cover of Kabbalistic Tarot, Robert Wang's book? I think it might be.
I think it is. Yeah, maybe that's, there's definitely a picture of it in there, if not on the cover itself. But I've heard that those 4 pillars are the representation of that.
Oh, really? Well, that's interesting. So each pillar would be like the pillar of force and form on one side.
Right. And as you rotate it for each of the 4 worlds, each one becomes the next.
It's opposite.
Yep.
Right. And that's interesting too, because, one of the strangest things that people notice on the Waite-Smith chariot is that reference to the cube of matter that he seems to be embedded in halfway up.
Cubic stone.
Yeah. And which is, usually a reference to matter itself.
And where have we seen that before?
Gosh.
As the throne of the emperor.
That's right. We have. Yeah. Yet one more way this just doesn't look like a vehicle you can travel in.
Yeah. Now that you mention it, he does look like he's encased in a block of concrete.
Looks like he's offended the mafia.
I never really noticed that before, but you're right.
Yeah, he's about to take a long walk off a short, it appears.
So I read an interesting thing about the cubic stone in that the cube itself, so it has 6 sides and then it has
8 vertices.
Right, 8 points and 12 lines, and if you add all that up together, you get 26, which is the name of the fourfold name of the tetragrammaton. Adds up to 26 for what it's worth.
For what it's worth. Okay, and other numbers in here.
I have one. On the Crowley card, if you count those little tiles, those little bricks or tiles, there's 21 of them.
Wait, which bricks? Oh, on the floor?
Right, there's 3 rows of 7.
No way. Oh my God. How do you like that?
So 21, I'm not sure exactly why, but I could probably make up a few reasons.
Well, and the fact that there's rows of 7 is significant too,
Right,
because we have
yeah.
7 for the chariot.
Right.
And also, in the Merkabah mysticism tradition, you have to travel through the 7 palaces on your way to the divine presence. They're called the Hekalot or something like that, on your way to, and it's a very perilous journey and you will probably die. But again, there's that reference to 7. The other thing that I was thinking about that's kind of interesting is that, you know how we said that the 5 senses are attributed to the first 5 single letters, so that the emperor is sight and the hierophant is hearing and the lovers is smell? Well, you would think that leaves touch and taste. Now, for some reason, touch is not one of them, but instead they have speech, and that's what's associated with the chariot. So strength or lust will be taste, but the chariot is speech. And what's interesting to me about that, just imaginatively, I don't know if this is actually justified, but the idea that you cannot touch the divine presence. You can only communicate with it. You can only have conversation with it, right? This idea of speech. And 16, 1 plus 6, the tower, associated with pay, the mouth. So mouth, speech, perhaps, there's a connection between 16 and 7 that way.
Interesting.
Highly speculative, like everything we do. Okay. Oh, colors? Should we do colors?
Okay, so we've got the amber color, as you see in the charioteer's armor on the Thoth card. For the king scale, we've got a maroon color and a kind of rusty red kind of color. And then in the princess scale, we have a dark greenish brown. If you think about it, if you've ever seen some varieties of live crabs, those are actually all the colors in their shells.
That's true.
You definitely see the dark greenish brown and so the rusty orangey reds and maroon even flecks in the shells. I don't know. The color of a crab, all the colors of the crab shell are of this card.
Yeah. And then there's the blue that is not of the scale, but
the blue that's not of the scale, but perhaps refers to the Great Sea of Binah. And if you go to the other end of the path, you would then have the red for Gabora.
Yeah, so it's like a blue crab and what happens after you boil it. Sorry, it's close to dinner time. So where's the greenish brown? I guess it's in these beasts.
Their shadows are, I guess, sort of a greenish brown color vaguely.
Okay, so the color that produces the note here is the amber. And the amber is considered sort of like somewhere between orange and yellow. So on the scale, orange is D and yellow is E. So apparently this is supposed to be D sharp or E flat. And finally, smells. Okay, so this is interesting. So do you know what the smell is for the chariot? What Crowley said?
No, I don't, but if I had to guess, it would probably be something oceanic.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. So the Golden Dawn was it the Golden Dawn? I think so. Associated it, or at least in 777, associated it with Onycha. Onycha. And what that is, as far as anybody can understand, was like some kind of snail product. And I guess they liked that association because snail, chariot, shell, armor, things like that. But number one, nobody really knows how you get that smell. And number two, it would probably be pretty nasty.
Yeah, it sounds repulsive.
I mean, it reminds me of, the way they used to get Tyrian purple from the shellfish and how it would stink, and even the royal people who wore it were known for their odor wearing royal purple. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the other thing that is associated with, or the substitute, is labdanum, which is very nice smelling. So yet another one of those resins, ancient resins. And
smells like an ancient resin.
Yeah. Yet another slightly vanillic, sweet smell, also known as rock rose. And I like it because it has kind of a little bit more depth than either benzoin or styrax or vanilla. It has a little more tenacity to it. And you do have to have it when you make an amber base, as a matter of fact. Speaking of amber. So amber is this, like we've spoken about before, is this sticky, sweet base that you find in a lot of very feminine perfumes. Anyway, so that's that's Cancer, and that's its smell. Okay, I think that's it. So just sort of to sum up, we've talked about a lot of things in this episode, but we've talked especially we've talked about the great work, the union of the male and female and whatever that implies beyond that. We've talked about crossing the abyss to the divine, the motion and progress and journey that the chariot takes in this vehicle. And we've talked about themes of enclosure and protection, and which we see in so many of the esoteric references in the imagery in this card. All right. So thank you for going on this journey with us in the chariot, with its not very practical wheels and its very strange hybrid horsepower. And we will be back next time with Strength or Lust.